Good morning, everyone. Kathleen, as many of you I know are very familiar with her work, and many of us were uplifted by her workshop yesterday. But I have so much respect for her work, both as a incredibly clear voice of reason and commitment, and in many different ways. As Kathleen was, for many years, was an academic philosopher, the chair of the philosophy department at Oregon State University, but also, as many of you know, an incredibly articulate writer. I can say, as someone who once had the role of being an editor for an essay that she wrote, that it was the easiest job I ever had. And her work has moved many of us. She actually made a very conscious choice a few years back to step away from academia, commit herself full-time to work of trying to awaken us all to the climate issues that we're living in, and I think she has played an incredibly important role in that work. So please join me in welcoming Kathleen Dean Moore.
I think that it's really important to begin by saying to Tom, thank you for having the courage, thank you for having the generosity to put this program together. It has been groundbreaking and heart-expanding and mind-blowing. Thank you, Tom. Well, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that here we are at this hinge point in planetary history. You could drive a nail through this decade, this one, and the fate of the Earth would swing in the balance. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times. In fact, I think that we are safe to say that we are the last human beings who will have a choice. We can choose to sit back and watch the life-supporting systems of the planet fray and fall apart, or we can choose to participate in the greatest exercise of the human imagination the world has ever seen. None of the above is not an option. So I wouldn't have chosen this challenge, and maybe you wouldn't have either, but history has chosen us. Honestly, if I could have chosen when to live, I would have chosen somewhere between the advent of modern dentistry and the advent of the atomic bomb. But nobody gave me that choice, and never mind. The story of the next millennium is ours to write. In fact, for better or worse, whether we want this responsibility or not, we are writing with every decision that we make. So what is the story of the pivotal years going to be? So I've been thinking it could be, definitely is a crime novel. I think it could be a horror story with zombie cockroaches. It could be scripture with all that terror and grace. It could be one of those old choose-your-own-adventure books where every page we turn leads us to something also exciting and new ideas and leaps of the imagination and a new sense of empowerment, or the weepy joy of relief and redemption. I know it's going to be a thriller, whether we can stop the fossil fuel industry in time. But the story that I want to write is a love story. I've been writing about the natural world since 1970, the first Earth Day. That's how old I am. In that time, in that last 50 years, 40% of everything that has the breath of life, animals and plants, has been erased from the face of the earth. 4 out of every 10 beings. The populations of the birds that we love the best, the red-winged blackbirds and the robins, have been cut by 1/3 in that same time. 39% of terrestrial wildlife is gone in our lifetimes. 39% of marine wildlife gone. These numbers are hard to contemplate. And of the freshwater wildlife, 76% are gone. The greatest extinctions are in the developing countries with losses of 58%, of course, because that's where the wealthy countries are exporting their environmental destruction. Unless we change course, I will die in a world that is half as rich and life-drenched as the one I was born into. My children will be able to tear out half the pages in their field guides. They won't need them. Thomas Berry wrote, "It's our generation that's witnessing the end of the era we evolved in. My generation has done what no previous generation could do because they lack the technological power, and what no future generation will be able to do because the planet will never again be so beautiful or abundant. In fact, it will take 5 to 7 million years for the planet to regain the abundance it has lost in our lifetimes." In 1970, nobody really knew about climate change except, of course, for the ExxonMobil scientists, and they weren't talking. In 1977, which was 10 years before James Hansen, Shell scientists wrote that burning fossil fuels will cause climate change with catastrophic results 50 years ago. And now the oil and gas industries effectively control most federal energy and environmental policy in the United States. And legislators who might have stopped them are bought off in a monstrous corruption scandal that's made legal by the Supreme Court. And in its frenzy for short-term profit, the oil and gas industry has made clear that it will not control itself for the public good, for the sake of the future of life on the planet, or even to protect its own profits in the long term. According to The Guardian, Exxon needs to stop all acquisition of new oil and gas fields and cut its production 35% in order to keep global temperatures in a livable range. Instead, they are engaged in a global expansion that will invest $115 billion in new development this year. The Japanese poet Mizuta Masahaide says, "Barns burnt down, now I can see the moon." And I guess that's a good news, bad news joke. Because one of the good things about our situation is that there is no denying anymore. There's no delusion. There's no lying, although people try. We know exactly what we're up against. The bad news for us is that knowing the extent of the emergency, there's no excuses if we don't act. You remember Greta? She says, "You say you don't know. I want you not to know. Because if you knew and you kept doing what you are doing, I would have to think you were evil." So here we are, folks. Here we are. And I have this feeling that all week we've been girding our loins for the work ahead of us. We've been making ourselves strong and clear-minded before this engagement, as warriors in all kinds of cultures do. We are girding our loins. You know that phrase. It comes from the Greek warriors who, they wore dresses, tunics, and they belted them around here. And I don't know this personally, but I'm told that it's very hard to do battle when you're wearing a skirt. So they would reach under, pull up this part of their tunic, and tuck it into their belt, thus girding their loins. Okay, so we are girded people, right? I feel quite girded. But the question is, that's not enough. I mean, what are we gearing up for? What are we girded for? And so those are the questions that we have to ask, and the ones I want to engage today. What is the work ahead? And not being Greek warriors raised to the battle, where are we going to find the strength, and where are we going to find the courage? So, question number 1, in case you're taking notes, Roman numeral 1. What is our work? I think we should consult the poets. Mary Oliver, Messenger. Say it along with me. You probably have it on your mirror. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers There the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast. There the purple plums. Here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. My work is loving the world. Lori told us this, Tom told us this last night in the group. People were saying, this is our work, to love the world. Okay, I agree. But this is getting to be tough. I'm a nature writer. Loving the world is what I do for a living. Trust me, it's not getting any easier. You know, it used to be so simple, so beautifully simple. I was in love with the world. You were in love with the world. Mary Oliver was in love with the world. And nature writing was a love song. So celebrating it was easy. You just go someplace astonishing and open your heart and open your notebook. Back then, the most critical question for a nature writer was, what does a nature writer wear? I tell you, it was easy. And so, I said, oh, no, what does a nature writer wear? And my daughter says, I will fix you up. So off we go to the mall. She puts me in this dressing room and starts bringing in stuff, all shades of white and cream and gray, off-white, flowing, layered, gauzy. I put it all on. And I go out and I say to my husband, do I look like a nature writer? He says, no. You look like a roll of toilet paper. Notice. But that was then. But then loving the world became much more complicated, as you know, and that's when it began dawning on me that I better hurry up if I'm going to celebrate this world. I was rejoicing of writing an essay, rejoicing in Frog Song, and then Walmart bulldozed the pond. And I just finished this essay about a lodgepole forest, and it burnt to the ground. And as I rejoice in humpback whale song, the whales are starving and going silent. And all the while, the big oil executives, to increase their unimaginable profits, are devising business plans that would knowingly take down the great systems that sustain human life and all the other lives on earth. Oh, the peril. A moral peril, the planetary peril. Back then, I went to a meeting of the Society for Environmental Journalists, where a representative of the American petroleum industry was there. His job was to tell people that BP wasn't really to blame for that terrible gusher in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deep Horizon oil spill, remember then? Here's what he said about that. I wrote it down. He said, a release occurred which was not contained. Oh, man. But what happened was that he and I happened to walk out of the building together. I go, oh, my God, this is my chance to finally engage a titan of industry. And so I said to myself, let's talk about love. And so I asked him, do you have children? You know what he said to me? First of all, I have to tell you, this is a big man. He has a shaved head. He has shoulders this wide. He's wearing a long black trench coat. He has feet the size of battleships. And he leans over me like this and he says, don't you ever, 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 ever underestimate the power of the fossil fuel industry. What is a love song against that power? My work is to love the world? How does that go? I think we had better be really, really clear about what love is and what sort of power love has. So I want to read you an essay from Great Tide Rising. It's called The Call to Forgiveness at the End of the Day. All those years, the Swainson's thrushes were the first to call in the mornings. Their song spiraled like mist from the swale to the pink sky. That's when I would take a cup of tea and walk into the meadow. Swallows sat on the highest perches, whispering as they waited for light to stream onto the pond. Then they sailed through the midges, scattering motes of wing light. Chipping sparrows buzzed like sewing machines as soon as the sun lit the Douglas firs. If I kissed the knuckle of my thumb, they came closer and trilled again. Oh, there was music in the mornings all those years. In the overture to the day, each bird added its call until the morning was an ecstasy of music. Evenings were glorious too. Frogs sang and sang. They sang all evening and into the night. They sang while garter snakes, their stomachs extended with frogs, crawled finally under the fallen bark of the oaks and stretched their lengths against cold ground. I don't know how many frogs there were in the pond then. Thousands, tens of thousands. Clumps of eggs like aspic, eyeballs in aspic. When the eggs hatched, there were tadpoles. I have seen the shallow edge of the pond black with wiggling tadpoles. In the years when the frog choruses began to fade, scientists said it was a fungus. When the bats stopped coming, they said that was a fungus too. When the goldfinches came in pairs, not flocks, we told each other the flocks must be feeding in a neighbor's field. No one could guess where the thrushes had gone. The fields were as empty as the perfect emptiness of a bell, the perfectly shaped absence ringing the angelus, the evening song, the call to forgiveness at the end of the day. In the spring when our granddaughter was born, I brought her to the pond so she could feel the comfort I had known there for so many years. Killdeer waddled in the mud by the shore, but even then not as many as before. By then the pond had sunk into its warm, weedy places, leaving an expanse of cracked earth. Ahead of the coming heat, butterflies fed in the mud between the cracks, unrolling their tongues to touch salty soil. I held my granddaughter in my arms and sang to her then an old lullaby that made her soften like wax in a flame, molding her little body to my bones. She fell asleep in my arms, unafraid. I will tell you, I was so afraid. Poets warned us, writing of the heartbreaking beauty that will remain when there is no heart to break for it. But what if it's worse than that? What if it's the heartbroken children who remain in a world without beauty? How will they find solace in a world without wild music? How will they thrive without green hills edged with oaks? How will they forgive us for letting frog songs slip away? It isn't enough to love a child and wish her well. It isn't enough to open my heart to a bird-graced morning. Can I claim to love a morning if I don't protect what creates its beauty? Can I claim to love a child if I don't use all the power of my beating heart to preserve a world that nourishes children's joy? Loving is not a kind of la-di-da. Loving is a sacred trust. To love is to affirm the absolute worth of what you love and to pledge your life to its thriving, to protect it fiercely and faithfully for all time. Ring the angelus for the salmon and the swallows. Ring the bells for frogs floating in bent reeds. Ring the bells for all of us who did not save the songs. Holy Mary, Mother of God, ring the bells for every sacred emptiness. Let them echo in the silence at the end of the day. Forgiveness is too much to ask. I would pray for only this, that our granddaughter would hear again that little lick of music, that grace note toward the end of a meadowlark song. Meadowlarks. There were meadowlarks. They sang like angels in the morning. This is what I want to say today. Loving is not a kind of la-di-da. Loving is a sacred trust. To love is to affirm the absolute worth of what you love and to pledge your life to its thriving, fiercely and faithfully for all time. If I didn't think the world was wonderful, I wouldn't give a damn about its destruction. unless an unraveling world cost me money or an unraveling world gave me a virus. And without love for the world, there's no sense of shame at the world's destruction. Wondering love for the world stands strong against all the diminishments. That's why we have to protect a sense of wondering love. We have to nourish it. We have to claim it. We have to defend it against those who would say that the natural world is, what's the opposite of wonderful? Commonplace, boring, disposable. Actually not my thing. It's easy to despair, but we have to stand strong in our love. Our love for all the living beings, our love for all the earth. But, dear Lord, why me? You know, Noah was called by God, and he moaned, I'm old, I'm tired. Why me, O Lord? And why me? I'm not a young woman. I carry my years on thick yellow bones. I have cut my hair. My feet are wide. My knees crackle like flames. My ankles won't let me fight or flee. Why me, O Lord? Can you love? God whispered. Can you love? Okay, tell me what I have to do. But first, tell me where I'm going to find the strength. Rachel Carson wrote, those who contemplate the beauty, you know this, those who contemplate the beauty of nature will find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts. This has become the most important sentence in my life. I know that my love for the beauty of the earth will sustain me and you in this struggle to defend the future. So let's get down to work. What do we have to do? Following Rachel, we will ask the beauty of the earth to guide us. So I want to take you to 3 beautiful places, 3 rivers, and accept the strength and the wisdom they offer. They tell us that our work is to do 3 things. 1, praise. 2, witness. 3, defend. Okay, so here's the first river. Here's the first duty. This is a slough on the Willamette. Love calls us to praise and celebration. Imagine our good fortune to live not in the time of the lonely, braying ichthyosaurs, but rather to live in the time of thrush song and 30,000 species of orchids, the time of laughing children and whales that teach each other to sing. All these lives, humans or otherwise, are the fruits of planetary creativity over 4 billion years. What do we make of that good fortune? Well, I want to take a stab at answering that, but it means I have to tell a story about frogs. Harry, this is for you. My husband is a scientist, a self-described hard scientist. You should see us trying to paddle a canoe. Philosopher in the bow, scientist in the stern. I'm rejoicing in the sounds of the night, and Frank is explaining the biomechanics of frog song. Imagine blowing up a balloon, he says. Now, imagine blowing up a balloon made of your neck skin, he says. Now, imagine blowing it up twice your size. Now, he says, hold it there and tremble all night. The energetics of this music are so tough, so much energy expended that it could kill a frog. Some tree frogs only have enough energy to sing for 3 nights. 3 trembling nights, imagine that. Imagine the silence of the frogs on day 4, he says. All the exhausted frogs. I do. I sit quietly and I'm listening to that silence. And then he said, now, imagine swallowing a moth so big that you have to push it down your throat with your eyeballs. We look across the slough, the path of the moon glittering with the discarded wings of 1 trillion flying ants. And we look at the moon itself bulging out between black mountains. We note, in passing, that we ourselves are sailing at 1 zillion miles an hour in the darkness, spinning in a spiral galaxy slung across space, slung out with all the singing frogs and the quiet ones, all of us up to our eyeballs in swamp. And if we even think about our own sparkling minds in that sparkling lake, if we think about the molecular structure of awareness, the biochemistry of celebration, the universe singing its own praises in the language of philosophy and science, we have to hold on to keep from swamping the canoe. Astonished, shaken. What does it mean to praise the world? Everything. Thunder rumbles, earth turns, birds fly north or south, fish rise or sink in the currents, the moon spills light on snow and sand, and we? Do we think we turn the crank that spins the earth? A good dose of wonder, a night of roaring waves, a face full of stars, the kick in the pants of the infinite universe, the huge unknowing. These remind us that there is beauty we did not create. There's mystery we cannot fathom. There are interests that are not our own. There's time we can't measure. And when we live humbly in full awareness of this astonishing fact that we have somehow earned a place in such a world, we live richer and deeper lives and more fully realize our humanity. So the moral conclusion of part one is that it's our love for the world, it's our joy, it's our glory, it's its glory that's the foundation of our obligation to its continuing. The argument goes like this. The same impulse that says, this is wonderful, is the impulse that says, this must continue. If this is the way the world is, extraordinary, surprising, beautiful, astonishing, mysterious, contingent, beloved, then this is the way I have to act in the world, with gratitude and celebration, with caring and respect, and most of all, with a sense of responsibility to make sure it continues to be. That's the first duty on that shining slough, the duty to celebrate. 2, the second river, the second duty. This is the Okavango River system in northwest province of Botswana. The duty is the obligation to warn and to witness. So these rivers are seasonal rivers, and they're subject to terrible flash floods. And according to research from Botswanan sociologists, whenever upstream communities or farmers along the rivers and streams notice signs of flooding, they notify their downstream neighbors about the dangers of flooding by drumming, blowing horns, or shouting out loud. That's a beautiful thing, the dance of shared alarm, the great shout, if I may. And can we do less here on the river of history, in the river of time, with a clear view upstream, a clear view downstream, about the consequences of global warming? Can we do anything less? So that's our second duty, living upstream on the Okavango River, the duty to warn. So what do we see coming from upstream? Aldo Leopold wrote that one of the costs of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. He goes on, much of the damage inflicted on land is quite invisible to laymen. An ecologist must either harden his shell and make believe that the consequences of science are none of his business, or he must be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well. Well, dear Aldo, that's not true anymore. We should tell you that. It's not just the ecologists who can't help but see the injuries to the landscape. Like everybody else who's paying attention to the natural world, we know we live in a world of wounds. Celebrating frog song and meadowlarks even as they vanish, we have a clear view. We can hear the crunch of unrestrained capitalism eating its own feet. We can see the gashes in the communities. We can smell the scorched brakes as they skid to a stop on this uber-Western, uber-capitalist dead-end road. We can hear the world cry out all the messages it's sending us in the language of fire and storm. We know that an economy that prides itself on accumulating wealth instead of sharing it, a culture that gobbles up the fecundity of the planet instead of nurturing it, any economy of infinite extraction will kill off the sources of its sustenance. We know that if we don't put the brakes on climate change now, it probably can't be stopped. We know, and that knowing has moral consequences. The Dalai Lama said, "It's not difficult to forgive destruction in the past that resulted from ignorance. Today, however, we have access to more information. It is essential that we re-examine ethically what we have inherited, what we are responsible for, and what we will pass on to future generations. We know that climate change is bringing on the greatest violation of human rights in the history of the planet. Here's Pope Francis. Climate disruption is one of the greatest moral disasters in human history because the people who suffer the most will have been least responsible for the cause. To stiff them, I would add, to leave them with the bill, which will be paid in the suffering and the lives of their children, that may fit in Donald Trump's business empire. It does not fit in the moral world. Our work, Pope Francis says, our work is to link social and ecological wrongs, the desperate instability of the poor and the fragility of the planet. We have to integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so we can hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. We must push back against the globalization of indifference. Going on, we can be silent witnesses to terrible injustices if we think that we can obtain significant benefits by making the rest of humanity, present and future, pay the extremely high costs of environmental destruction. And more recently, David Orr says, the economic machine that has resulted in a destabilized climate raises the specter that we will make our home uninhabitable to humans, and we will take much of the natural world with us. This is a crime against the future, a crime that has yet no name, no judge, no jury, just an awful silence. Silence? We cannot allow that. Honestly, it's the craziest thing. Lots of times when an organization asks me to talk about the climate crisis, the global extinction crisis, the crisis of ecosystem collapse, the diminishing prospects of the children, their request is very specific. Nothing grim. People don't want to hear grim. Give us reasons to hope. Well, for crying out loud. In a power-hungry, profit-driven frenzy of extraction and pollution, international megacorporations, in collusion with thuggish petrostates, are well on their way to turning Earth into Venus, a planet that, it must be noted, does not support life. I think that's what they don't want me to say. But under these conditions, what am I supposed to say? At the exact moment when despair is intellectually justified, it's morally impossible. And the very facts that paralyze action are the facts that require it. We love the lives on this planet, and they are being taken from us. We must, as a matter of will and courage, tell the truth of our time, shout it. We don't have any choice. In every way we know, in every sidewalk, in every page, we must bear witness to the glories of the world and the sins against it. If the world is full of holes and heartbreaks, then let that be our world. If gales rip the water until foghorns howl, then let that fear empower us. If oil-soaked corporate thugs pillage and thieves plunder the world, then let us hold their feet to the fire. And this: if our hearts break, then let them break open to love, which is the mother of grief and regret. We have to make good on the promise that we all whispered into the wispy hair of our newborn children. We whispered, I will always love you. I will keep you safe. I will give you the world. We didn't mean we'll give you whatever's left scattered and torn on the table after the great cosmic going out of business sale. We said, I will give you this beautiful, life-graced, life-sustaining, tree-shaded, rain-polished world. So if there's work to be done now, then it's to accept sorrow as a last great gift offering from the desperate world, and to shape it into something that is loving and beautiful and fierce enough to stand in defense of all we love, so desperately imperiled. On the Okavanga River, the writer's second duty, the duty to warn. Number 3, The duty to protect, defend, obstruct, resist. We can change the destructive course of this world. It's true that we will live to see the end of a way of life on earth. But whether we witness the emergence of new ways of life based on sharing and intelligence and justice, or whether it's the emergence of a degraded, dangerous, and brutal slide toward who knows what, that's a human choice. So let me take you to another river, the Toklat River in Alaska. Last year, it was 2 years ago now, I was a writer in residence at Denali National Park. And I was living in this little tar paper log cabin on the east fork of the Toklat River. It was June. It was a solstice. It was Alaska. It was murderously hot. At midnight, on the porch of that cabin, 104 degrees. Even the mountain sheep came down to stand in the river to cool off. All-time record. All-time record number of mosquitoes. So here we are in this cabin, and I'm lying on the bunk, slapping mosquitoes. And next to the wall, my husband is lying completely covered by a white sheet, as still and dismayed as a corpse. And the reason is that I would rather be bitten than hot, and he would rather be hot than bitten. And all the doors and the windows were open to let in any relief, even though those doors and the shutters were studded with these long spikes to keep out the grizzly bears. And so here we had another terrible choice: roast to death or be gnawed to death by a grizzly bear. My job was, if I heard any shuffling, I was supposed to leap out of bed and slam the door. So I'd come to the Toklat River to think about global warming, and obviously it was not going well. We are caught up in a river rushing toward a hot, stormy, and dangerous planet. The river is powered by huge amounts of money invested in mistakes that are dug into the very structure of the land. It's a tangled braid of fearful politicians and preoccupied consumers and reckless corporations and bewildered children, everybody feeling helpless. How do we change this current? So obviously there was no way I was going to fall asleep. So I pulled on some clothes and I walked to the bank of the river. The Toklat is a glacial river. It's this shallow river that braids across a good half-mile of gravel beds, dried stream courses, deep-dug channels. You probably know what I mean. Sloshing with water from melting glaciers, the currents were unpredictable. They looked chaotic. But there were patterns. Now, some of you are river people. You probably played in currents since you were children. You probably know the rules of rivers, and you know that any disruption in a river, that any disruption that slows the river will reshape the current. And where the water piles against an obstacle, it loses energy and drops its load and makes an even bigger obstacle, right? And when water curls around that obstacle, the current's own force turns it upstream, yes? And when there are so many obstacles and islands that the channel can't carry all its water and sediment, it crosses a stability threshold, and the river finds a different way. So with any disturbance, the downstream force of the river turns against itself. Disturbance creates more disturbance. Islands create themselves. So I shoved a rock in the river. I watched the current curl around upriver, and that changing current made me grin. We don't have to stop the river. Our work, large and small, collective and individual, is to make a deflection in complacency, an obstruction to profits, a better way, a smarter idea, more fun technique, a stoppage to the lies, then another and another, to change the energy of the flood. And as it swirls around all these snags and subversions, the current will slow, lose power, eddy in new directions, and create new systems and structures that change its course forever. So choose your stone and chuck it in, people. It doesn't matter. Skip in a bunch of stones or get together with your friends and roll in a boulder. Heave in a log. Heave in the rib cage of a drowned raccoon. It doesn't matter. Get in the way. Build something new. and learn this word, avulsion. Avulsion. It's a hydrological term for the moment when the stream bed has so many blockages that it can't carry its load, and it flips overnight and carves a new direction. Also, that's on the East Fork of the Toklat River, a third duty, which is the writer's duty to defend. So summarizing, the duties of ferocious love: to praise, to warn, to defend. Now, I would say we are in a tough spot. We are in a place where we really can't make up our minds between hope and despair. That's a tough spot to be in, because on the one hand, if we choose hope, no matter what we do, everything is going to be fine, that is a moral abdication, because if everything's going to be fine no matter what I do, I don't have to do anything. Or we could fall into blinding despair. That also is a moral abdication. If the world is going to hell no matter what I do, then I don't have to do anything. So hope or despair, I am off the hook. But notice that that's a logical fallacy. We folks call it the fallacy of the false dichotomy. Between hope and despair, there is this broad ground that we call moral integrity. Acting not out of hope that we can change the world, and not failing to act because we despair to change the world, but acting out of integrity, which is a matching between what we believe and what we do. So we are invited by this dichotomy to live gratefully because life is a gift, and to act reverently because the world is sacred. To live simply because we don't believe in taking more than our fair share. To act with love for the world because we love it. So turning away from blind and careless optimism and turning away from blinding despair, that is a choice we make. And once made, we're free to imagine into existence the love story that we want to live. So this is our great work. To tell the stories of the new civilization, a civilization based on what ecologists and every religion of the world are telling us, that we are fully members of a beautiful, astonishing, contingent community of living and dying. It's too late for this willful ignorance of business as usual. It's too late for the tear-jerkers of the great unraveling. We are not trying to save our way of life. We are now trying to save the world from this way of life's destructive power. Our work is to let our imagination soar, not to envision the end of civilization, but to set a compass course for its redemption. Do you think the Arizona air is dry? So I want to close by telling you about a trip that a friend of mine, Sue Ellen Campbell, and I made to the Oregon coast. We're old climate veterans, and we've tried to do our part in every way we know how to keep fossil fuel addicted civilization from driving off the cliff. Are we tired? Yes. Are we discouraged? Absolutely. Are we pissed off? Yes. Are we sad? Call it brokenhearted. Are we quitting? It might be time, we told each other. Game over, the friends and the experts tell us. We're doomed. It's true that the news about global warming is awful. I don't have to tell you, more bigger wildfires, great swaths of drought, terrible suffering in the coastal villages. Don't think that quitting hasn't crossed our minds. So last spring, on the way from one meeting to another, we stopped along the coast and we watched this red sun setting through purple clouds, and parents were gathering up their families and children were lingering ankle deep in the pink water, looking out to sea. Why do we do this climate work? We asked ourselves. We asked each other. And to our surprise, answers to that question flocked out, just one right after another. So I'd like to read you this list in answer to our question, why do we keep up this work? Because we are not doomed as long as we act. A world in which we do everything we can to restrain climate change barely resembles one when we do nothing. We don't like the first world, but we might not survive in the second. Because I want to be the kind of person who doesn't give up on important jobs. You don't do what's right because you think it might get you something. You do it because it's right. That's what integrity is, doing what you believe in even if it may not save the world. Because I will not walk away from the hurting world any more than I will walk away from my mother as she grows old and frail and sometimes confused. I love her and I owe her and have a duty to her and admire her and enjoy her company. Because everybody knows what we have to do, it isn't as though the world is waiting for some technological breakthrough or divine revelation. Because climate change is unjust. It threatens the greatest violation of human rights the world has ever seen. But injustice is cowardly and fragile. It crumbles when people stand up for what is right. Because we have so much to lose and so much left to save, everything from birdsong to our own sorry souls. Because I am wearing my father's rubber boots. They are too big for me, and my own are old and torn. So I'm walking in the boots he wore at the edge of all the marshes he defended until the day he died. If you are walking in the shoes of a hero, you can't exactly turn back. Because I can't and therefore don't have to solve the whole problem alone, I only have to help where and how I can. Many good people are in this fight. They are smart and experienced and empowered by a vision of a planet redeemed. Because despair is lonely and useless, while climate action is full of friendship, satisfaction, and glee, you get to hang out with people who care as much as you do and act with the same remorseless resolve. Taking action is the only real cure for hopelessness. It feels good and important, like you're not wasting your life on small things. We stayed at the beach until the stars came out and the breeze came up. Then we walked back to camp on a mossy trail through a tunnel of spruce trees. A Swainson's thrush sang and would not stop singing, even in the deepest dusk. And that also was a reason. The deep moss was a reason. So were the ancient trees. So were the children standing in the swash. We can't quit now. Thank you very much.